Danny, listen. It's a manhunt, and they won't stop until we're both dead.
There's a lot of words that could be used to describe the Manhunt games. Brutal, violent, disturbing, but really it's hard to describe the game to someone who hasn't played it because there's this tone, this creeping dread that really can't just be described. It's a survival horror game, but it's also a stealth action title, and it's really a one-of-a-kind game. Because in most survival horror games, you hide from the monster and are powerless to stop it for the most part. But in this game, it's different, because the monsters are just like you, human beings, depraved psychos to be sure for the most part, but still just people hunting you down. More so in these games, you are the killer, the monster creeping and hiding in the shadows, waiting for your chance to strike. And couple that with the gruesome executions, the bleak tone, depressing world and character design, bleak ambience and soundtrack, and of course the mind-bending and unsettling narratives. Well, then you've got Manhunt 1 and 2. Also, can't forget to mention they're also created by Rockstar Games, known for GTA and Red Dead among other titles, so there's definitely a lot to unpack with these games in terms of secrets, cut content, Easter eggs, and just a bunch of weird and crazy stuff in an already insane set of games. And luckily we've got a great iceberg chart to delve into with the world of Manhunt, created by Richtofen 5200. Also, this iceberg is interesting because while it does have the standard tier system, there are also like sub-tiers or grouped entries that kind of relate around the same topic. But without further ado, let's jump into the Manhunt Iceberg. Also, spoiler warning for the events of Manhunt 1 and 2. Tip of the iceberg. Grand Theft Auto Online content. Gang masks. So GTA Online has quite a few Manhunt references and even direct pieces of content, and one of the main ones are the really cool masks you can buy of the various gangs from the first game. They're not exactly one-to-one, but it's really obvious what they're based on. You've got all the main hunter factions here. The Innocence, War Dogs, the Smileys, Cerberus, and even the Rabbit and the Monkey. But also it's not just Manhunt 1, they even have a beta mask variant of the Pervs gang from Manhunt 2. So glad it's at least getting a little love in GTA Online, even if it's nothing compared to the first one. Manhunt theories. Jimmy Hopkins is James Earl Cash. This is a pretty popular Manhunt theory stating that the protagonist of Bully, Jimmy Hopkins, actually grows up to become the protagonist of the first Manhunt game, James Earl Cash. Now, why exactly do people think this? Well, there are a few reasons. First of all, they are both named James and are pretty similar in appearance, both being bald white dudes, and also it's definitely possible that all these Rockstar games take place in the same universe, with references to Manhunt littered across the GTA games, as well as even Bulworth Academy from Bully being mentioned in GTA 4, and even Starkweather being mentioned as well, basically the main villain from the first Manhunt game. Also, both characters have a clear propensity towards crime and violence, hence why Jimmy is taken to a boarding school, and why James Earl Cash is being sentenced to death at the start of Manhunt. Another thing that people look at with this theory is the timeline of events, because if Bully is a prequel to Manhunt, which takes place in 2003, and Jimmy is a 15-year-old in Bully, then it has to take place sometime probably in the mid-90s at least. Although the official Rockstar website states the game takes place in 2006, so that pretty much shuts down this theory right there. But there is some in-game clues that hint that it could potentially take place in 1995. And in regards to his name, well, some believe that Jimmy or James might have changed his last name to his father's, which was Cash, which is possible I suppose, but the evidence for this whole thing is pretty weak in my opinion, although it is a fun little theory for sure. James Earl Cash could be Jimmy Hopkins' father. Now, this is a pretty similar theory, but definitely a lot more plausible in my opinion. The timelines would make a little more sense, seeing that Bully does actually take place after Manhunt 1 and not before, but there are some problems with this theory as well. First of all, in Manhunt 2, there is an interesting Easter egg where a billboard can be found labeled JEC and Sons, which is likely James Earl Cash and Sons. So by this point, he already has his children working with him with this construction company it seems like, and Manhunt 2 takes place in 2007, only a year after Bully, so probably not Jimmy. And I should mention that some of Cash's family is shown in one of the most messed up missions in the game, Strapped for Cash, in which some unknown members of his family are captured captured and killed if you don't rescue them. And while they don't tell you who they are, it seems like they're his dad, mom, sister, and brother. But it doesn't seem like any of these people are obviously young enough to be his son or any of his children. Just thought I should mention it. James Earl Cash and Trevor Phillips could be brothers. Okay, so one last Cash theory here, and this is definitely the most out there one. I guess because they're just both crazy serial killers, that's why they could be related, but really besides that, they aren't even really alike at all. Of course, Cash is a mostly silent protagonist and operates coldly and brutally, while Trevor is pretty much the opposite, going full-blown psycho, guns blazing type deal. He's not really the type to hide in the shadows and kill one at a time like Cash, but that doesn't really mean they're not family, I guess. But also, like I said, Cash's brother is potentially killed and strapped for Cash, so there's that. And Trevor even also had a brother himself named Ryan, who died of unknown causes. Easter eggs. Abandoned house in Bully. So more Manhunt stuff in Bully, I guess, but I'm not too sure what this is referring to exactly, even as a diehard fan of these games. There are a couple of abandoned buildings in Bully. There's an abandoned Blue Skies shipping warehouse, which does have a truck found in both GTA and Manhunt, but this entry refers to a house, so I'm not too sure. But there's also an abandoned pool house called Blue Balls Pool House, which becomes a safe house in the game later on. Not really sure with this one though. Let me know in the comments if you do. Robert Stanton is the voice actor of One Smiley. Not really an Easter egg, but definitely a cool thing to know. Basically, one of the Smileys, a group of hunters in Manhunt, is voiced by Robert Stanton, who is known for voicing Mr. Galloway in Bully, so there's another connection for you there. And trust me, this whole iceberg isn't just dedicated to connections between Bully and Manhunt. There's more GTA connections coming later on, and other really interesting stuff.
I'm sorry I lost my shoes, Mommy. I'm sorry. Witchetty! Ah! Witchetty! You want my head juice? Fine, take it. There's a good boy. There's a good boy. There's a good boy. But I don't want to be food for your wiggly kids, Witchetty man. I feel the wiggling. He's wiggling!
Mark Margolis is the Tramp. Random all-star casting choice here. I guess Rockstar is just really good at securing talent for seemingly random roles, because they got Mark Margolis, known for portraying Hector on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and even Alberto from Scarface, Nappa from Oz, not Dragon Ball Z, and much more. Again, not an Easter egg, but a cool thing to mention, I guess.
Follow me, stay here, follow me. Come on! You think a guy like that would have some liquor for a friend? I'll show him. I'll show him all. Don't need any help from Mr. What's-His-Face. I'm my own man. Yeah, we're a team now, me and Mr. Tough Nuts, a team.
Starkweather's mention in Bully. Briefly mentioned this earlier, but yeah, the infamous director Lionel Starkweather, who is the primary antagonist in Manhunt, is actually talked about by some of the townsfolk in Bully. But it's still kinda wild because, like we discussed, this takes place afterwards, so everything about this snuff film ring should have been brought to light, but that I guess brings up the discussion on whether it's really the same guy, considering that Bully could be part of the 3D Rockstar universe rather than the HD one, which is differentiated mostly within the lore of the GTA games, but could still apply here. Either way though, a cool nod and Easter egg. Manhunt is canon within the Rockstar verse. Cars from GTA. So here's where we get into a lot of the GTA connections, so prepare for quite a few of these rapid fire. First off with the cars, it makes a lot of sense that they would just port over cars that they already used for the GTA games, right? So there's really too many to really mention, but a few of these include the Ballista Compact, Kuruma, Stallion, Benson, Burrito, Trashmaster, and of course the police and ambulance cars. Sprunk. Likewise, there are also some Sprunk soda machines and even a billboard in Manhunt 2 featuring the GTA parody of Sprite. Rite Aid. Another parody take, but this time on a drugstore chain called Rite Aid, which is featured in Vice City as well as Manhunt in the first level of the game. Cerberus in a bar. Another cool Manhunt Easter egg can be found in San Andreas when you go into basically any bar where graffiti of a Cerberus hunter can be found. Joe's Beds. This is another chain of stores featured in both Manhunt and Vice City, with this being a bed store that is inaccessible by the player in both titles. Gash. A little bit more obscure here, but again, this is a brand featured in a couple GTA games, although sometimes it's called Zip and sometimes Gash as it is in Vice City and Manhunt, with it being a parody of the popular clothing store Gap. Carcer Gas. This is a brand of propane tanks that appear both in Manhunt as well as San Andreas, where they can be shot and exploded to kill enemies. Michael DeSanta's heist in Carcer City. So in the GTA 5 story, when the characters are preparing for a heist, they start talking about their first robberies that they committed, and Michael explains that his first was a $10,000 score he did back in 1988 in Carcer City, which is of course where Manhunt 1 takes place. Also gives me a little hope we might see Carcer yet again in the HD era, as we know that for the most part the early 3D and HD eras are different universes when it comes to the Rockstar games. I'm moving to Carcer City. Another line here referencing the city, which can be heard occasionally in San Andreas by pedestrians when they see CJ kill someone. Oh, and yeah, I don't think they actually want to move there, because Carcer makes San Andreas look like literal heaven on earth. Carcer City is nearby Liberty City. So it's not exactly certain where Carcer City is based off of in terms of real life cities in America, but we can definitely take a good guess, as pretty much all the cities in these Rockstar games are based on real ones. What we do know is that a news segment in GTA 3 describes Carcer being nearby Liberty City, which is a parody of New York City, meaning it's likely somewhere in the Northeast. Also, due to its industrialization and world design, it's thought to be a Rust Belt city, possibly taking inspiration from the likes of Detroit or Flint, Michigan, or possibly somewhere in New Jersey. Gary Schaefer on Lips 106. This is quite interesting because, of course, GTA 3 not only takes place 2 years before Manhunt 1, but it was also released well before it as well that same year. And yet still, Gary Schaefer, the corrupt police chief of Carcer City, is mentioned on the station Lips 106, having been cleared of his corruption charges in a controversial decision where the witnesses have gone missing. So this could be a little bit of a timeline mistake, since at the end of Manhunt, Schaefer is arrested and taken to trial for corruption in 2003, or this could simply be the second time that he was arrested on these charges.
So I'm sitting here reading the Liberty Tree, and it says, in nearby Carcer City, a good day for law and order as Police Chief Gary Schaefer was cleared of corruption charges in a controversial decision by the courts. Let's hope those missing witnesses turn up safe and sound.
Cash and Hood's photos in San Fierro. Another cool but small callback to Manhunt can be found in the police station of Las Venturas, where there's a bulletin board with photos of James Earl Cash as well as a few hoods. There's also some newspaper articles about them, possibly in relations to the events of Manhunt 1, but you can't really make out any legible text, and that's also probably not the case because San Andreas takes place in 1992. Manhunt figures in Zero RC. Another fun Easter egg, not really canon or anything, just like the photos in San Fierro, but there's also GTA characters in the shop as well, so it's pretty clear it's just a fun Easter egg, which can actually be found in Zero's shop in San Andreas, where there's a James Earl Cash figure as well as a Pigsy Manhunt figure. And yeah, I really just wish these were real. I'd definitely cop these. Also got some Vice City ones as well. Pretty neat stuff. Starkweather's Past in Vinewood. We'll get into this more a little later, diving into Starkweather's character, but yeah, the acclaimed director of such great hits as, well, we don't really know much about his real Hollywood or Vinewood films in this case, but he was a famous director for a time before he kind of fell off, went crazy, and then just started making snuff films. Adults only rating for Manhunt 2. We've mostly been talking about Manhunt 1, and I'm sure you've heard how disturbing and violent it is, but in reality it has nothing on Manhunt 2, at least in terms of its brutal executions, which landed the game an adults only rating, an extremely rare ESRB rating only given to 26 games ever, which is not actually what it means. Really, it is effectively banned in the US, as most retailers refuse to carry titles with an AO rating. And this version of the game was never released officially though, and was censored heavily by Rockstar so that it could be re-rated and receive an M rating, and eventually be released in the form it is today. Controversy. No doubt these two games are some of Rockstar's most controversial titles ever, and that's coming from the people that made GTA. I mean, almost every game they make is controversial, so that's saying something. And both are contentious in their own ways. Of course, both of the games are violent, but Manhunt 2 really took it to a whole new level, which is mostly why it got an AO rating originally and was banned in multiple countries. While the first Manhunt was violent, it's nothing like the second game. However, its subject matter and story definitely bumps it up in terms of the disturbing factor. Also, Rockstar themselves, the people responsible for the game, felt uncomfortable with their own product. That's right, even they were thinking they might have been pushing it too far, with a former Rockstar employee even saying in an interview, quote, "There was almost a mutiny at the company over that game." And the controversy was heightened even further shortly after its release when a real-life murder was attributed to the game, causing Rockstar to be sued, with the victim's parents claiming the game had influenced the boy responsible for committing the murder. And even to this day, these games remain very contentious and even banned in many countries and on many gaming platforms. Censoring. We talked about the case of censorship in regards to Manhunt 2 receiving a completely overhauled game in order to meet ESRB standards for an M rating, which had to be toned down, including completely removing executions and characters, but we'll get to that a little more in a second. But in general, Manhunt 1 and 2 have both had a lot of censoring, depending on the version being played. Although, once again, Manhunt 2 definitely is censored a lot more, despite an uncensored version of the game making it to PC, but the other versions include a PS2, PSP, and get this, a Wii version. Crazy, but while the Wii version is one of the most censored ones, including many cut weapons and red tints and blur effects placed over execution animations, it's still one of the most gruesome because you actually use the Wii remote to swing around and perform these graphic executions. But there are plenty of other differences, including weapons and animations featured in only certain versions, and basically all of the Manhunt 2 ports have a notable red filter placed on executions, like I said, to obscure what's happening, but the PC version doesn't have this. And in Manhunt 1, well, it's still a pretty brutal game. It's clear they try to kind of obscure the violence using the camera system for the execution, but it still works in the game's favor as it obviously fits in the game's story. And I know many people have pointed this out, but it is really interesting that people don't really bat an eye at TV or movie violence, which is just as, or most of the time even more grotesque and done on real people in live action, compared to these extremely pixelated characters on screen. Uncensored PS2 leak. Now, remember how I mentioned that Manhunt 2 originally had an uncensored version that received an adults-only rating and was never released? Well, it wasn't officially released because of this controversy. However, a PS2 version of the game was leaked online, showing how the game had been modified. Notably, we discussed the tint effect that is put on executions, which is not present here, also no ghosting effect either. Some particularly brutal executions involving things like pliers are found in this version, but not the final PS2 release. What that entails, YouTube would not like me to say, but you can look it up if you're interested. And also, this version had some civilian or innocent characters that are not present in the released PS2 version, which could be killed in the same brutal ways as the hunters. And there's some slight other changes, including dialogue and menu stuff, but that's basically it. Level 2, Beneath the Surface. Cottonmouth might be nearby Vice City. This is really interesting because recently there was some pretty wild alleged leaks of GTA 6 stating that you would not only be able to go to Vice City, but also places like Carcer City and Cottonmouth from Manhunt 1 and 2. And I know it's probably just some crazy rumor, I mean, you know how it is. But the fanboy in me would absolutely love to see that happen. And technically, if we're going by what area Cottonmouth is based on in the US, it could be plausible, because it's likely it's based on New Orleans or Atlanta. And it's at least clear it's close to Florida, as palm trees can be seen near many houses in the level Most Wanted. So it definitely could be near enough to Vice City to make it in the game, which would just be so sick. But again, this is kind of tinfoil hat stuff, but a man can dream. Beta Cash. In early pre-release screenshots of Manhunt, a different model of Cash can be seen sporting a brown tank top and a beard, and this model was actually used and can still be found in the game in forms of corpses in Starkweather's estate, as well as Cash's beta heads on spikes in the garden area. Also, I'm pretty sure there's another dead Cash in Mouth of Madness. Some hoods could be off-duty cops. This is a theory in the Manhunt community that some members of the first gang of hunters encountered in the game, the hoods, are actually off-duty cops in the Carcer Police Department, which to a degree makes some sense, considering the corruption and degradation of not just the police department but the whole city, to be honest. However, they are basically just street thugs and the easiest gang to fight in the game with no real difficult gimmicks. They're pretty basic enemies. Also, one of the hoods actually wears a jacket claiming he already killed cops, so I'm not too sure with this. Daniel Lamb might be in San Fierro. So it's stated in the manual for Manhunt 2 that Daniel Lamb, the protagonist of Manhunt 2, graduated from the University of San Fierro in the state of San Andreas in 1985, suggesting he probably lived and also worked in the area, which could give credence to the fact that after the events of Manhunt 2, supposing you get the good ending, Daniel could go back and live there, and it's thought that Daniel Lamb and his appearance could be based on sketches of the Zodiac Killer, where one of his known victims was actually in San Francisco, California. Dr. Pickman's cameo in Awakening. Dr. Pickman is one of the main antagonists of Manhunt 2, and a character featured prominently later on in that game, as he is head of the project, but he's actually briefly seen in the first mission of the game, Awakening.
Daniel, it's not safe up here. Return to your room immediately. Resnick, escort Mr. Lamb.
Leo Casper's beta body in Awakening. Once again, a beta model is used as a corpse in a level, with this being Leo's beta model, featured in the first level Awakening yet again. Although it's quite gruesome and just a torso, so I can't really show it here. Starkweather's fetish. So clearly if you've played the first Manhunt, you'll know pretty much right away that the director, Lionel Starkweather, is a depraved individual and gets off on the murders being committed. I mean, some of these voice lines are just wild.
Oh my god, I've had an accident. I'm serious, man. You brought me off.
So yeah, clearly he has some sort of sick, twisted fetish towards violence, murder, and torture, which interestingly ties into the game's only two difficulties, fetish and hardcore. Both terms that, yeah, I don't think I need to go into there. But just know one is a normal difficulty and the other makes an already challenging game crazy hard. Real-life killer references. In the first game, almost every named character is named after or based on a real-life serial killer, adding to the disturbing nature of the game and its unsettling characters. Ramirez is possibly named after Richard Ramirez, while Scarecrow, a removed character from the game, is named Kenneth Jesperson, very similar to Keith Jesperson, and that also goes for the removed boss of the Cut Clowns gang, who was James W. Gacy, which is probably the most obvious out of all of these, and while not a serial killer, James Earl Cash is possibly based on the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., James Earl Ray. Some Red Kings might be Yeah, so this is where things start to get really disturbing. So the Red Kings are quite a mysterious hunter faction in the second game and aren't featured that much, and just seem like a typical street gang, but there is some pretty strange and disturbing dialogue that can sometimes be heard from the hunters when they kill the player, stating, quote, "Good thing I'm a necro." Pigsy's model in Divided They Fall. Just like with Cash, there are some headless corpses of Pigsy which can be found in the level Divided They Fall, which can be seen inside the apartment of Ramirez. Level 3, the body of the iceberg. Valiant Video Enterprises. Mr. Nasty. So I did call Starkweather the main overall antagonist of Manhunt 1, which he is, and we'll get to him in a second, but there's someone even above him in the game's story. A very mysterious character pulling the strings behind it all. Someone who doesn't even appear in the actual game, and that character is known as Mr. Nasty. A mysterious figure only mentioned in the game's instructional manual, as a head figure of Valiant Video Enterprises. Possibly the individual running the company and actually selling these films on the black market. However, while Starkweather is killed at the end of the game and the other prominent figures involved, the corrupt police chief Gary Schaefer, is arrested as stated by the journalist, Mr. Nasty remains unidentified and perhaps was never actually caught. And this image found on the game's cover is also commonly associated with Mr. Nasty, with some saying that this is actually him. Although there isn't any confirmation on this. as this could just be a random skins hunter. Also, I think it's safe to say his name is definitely a reference to the Video Nasty scare from the 90s in the UK, where people were selling banned videos of death, with even one headline reading, quote, "Mr. Nasty sells death videos to our kids." Also, there is his Valiant Video Enterprises website, which has its own entire entry, so valiant-ent.tv. Yeah, so this is the promotional website I mentioned, which is the domain of Valiant Video Enterprises, and has the adult store as well as chat logs from Mr. Nasty himself, and even a possible picture of him labeled as me. And for some reason this image is really unsettling to me, but looking further into the website, there is also the potential voice of Mr. Nasty, which can be heard, although he disguises his identity with a voice changer.
Valiant Video Enterprises. Real hardcore, real fetish, real brutal. Videos made to order. New members only interactive forums. Now at www.valiant-ent.tv.
Yeah, this guy is clearly just as disturbed as Starkweather, if not even more so. But maybe that's what's the most disturbing about Mr. Nasty. We pretty much know nothing about him. While we know a lot about the motivations and feelings of Starkweather, Mr. Nasty is never caught or punished for his crimes seemingly, and we don't even get to know who he really is. But it is revealed through the game's manual that he sells these tapes for $25 on DVD and VHS, and sells weapons for the snuff films on his website. And some of these are straight up scams. My guy's about to get canceled for trying to sell plastic bags for $30. What? Wooden bat $150. Come on, dude. Gimp mask $200, sickle $300. Bruh, I'm gonna need a CoffeeZilla video on this man. Not for, making snuff movies, but because he's out here scamming people for plastic bags. All jokes aside, I gotta say Rockstar really killed it with the promotional material for this game. Lionel Starkweather. The iconic director and main voice you hear throughout the whole game. He's the one producing these snuff films, including the one Cash is participating in, which was meant to end with the White Rabbit killing Cash, although that doesn't really go to plan. Starkweather himself was once a famous Vinewood director, the Rockstar equivalent of Hollywood. After he became a washed-up director, he moved to Carcer City and began Valiant Video Enterprises with Mr. Nasty, which was also done in collaboration with the corrupt police department, as well as the various hunters and gangs, including his own personal bodyguards, the Cerberus. Also, like many other characters in the game, his name is likely based on real-life killers, namely Charles Starkweather and Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Some have also noted his similarities in appearance to real-life Italian film director Sergio Leone, although this could also just be a coincidence. He's also a very clearly disturbed psychopath that gets off on all the killing and gruesome violence, even praising Cash for his more brutal executions throughout the game. And I gotta say, amazing performance by Brian Cox here. He really kills it as the director, no pun intended.
You're making this look too easy. Cut these guys some slack, for Christ's sake. You're really doing it for me. I ain't been this turned on since... Well, let's not go there. Just keep capping these crazies. They come out of the woodwork like termites. That's it, Cash. Don't let a single nutjob back on the streets. This is the best kind of therapy money can buy. You hacked them all. I knew you'd be my golden boy. Yeah!
And while what he says is definitely disturbing, it is at least encouraging for the first half of the game. When it just goes silent and off script, it's even creepier, to be honest. Also, I just found out recently that this is the same guy that plays Logan Roy on Succession, so yeah, that's pretty sick. And by the final mission, Deliverance, Cash finally kills the director himself in one of the game's most brutal moments with a chainsaw, which I can't show here if I want this video to even have a chance of being monetized. Ramirez. This character is one of Starkweather's most brutal and loyal followers, and one of the boss fights in the game featured in the level Divided They Fall. He's also the leader of the War Dogs gang, and is even the star of another Starkweather snuff film. And I'm not gonna lie, this part of the game is really difficult, because it's impossible to actually execute him stealthily. And when you do it, it plays an animation where he just breaks free. Basically, you just gotta go guns blazing here. The Pikmin Project. Dixmoor Hospital for the Criminally Insane. This is a prominent location in the second game and where the first level takes place, with it being a mental asylum for criminals owned by the Project, conducting various experiments on its patients, including Daniel Lamb. Dr. Pickman. We mentioned him a little bit earlier, but he is the head of the Pickman Project and the one responsible for everything happening in the second game, being a sort of overarching protagonist until Leo takes over that role later on in the game. But he is the one who implanted the false memories and allows Leo to take over Daniel's mind, and can control him via the Pickman Bridge, which allows the two personalities to coexist. There are also a ton of other failed experiments done by the Doctor and the Project, which we'll look at later. But eventually Leo and Daniel hunt him down and do kill him. Michael Grant. Michael Grant is another member of the Project and a high-ranking scientist, as well as a former friend of Daniel, who was killed by him in the form of Leo during a flashback mission called Best Friends, which is done so that Danny can actually escape. Dr. Judy Sender. Judy Sender is a scientist of the Project that is tracked down by Leo and Danny early on in the game, where she gives Daniel a key to his safe house and is later encountered on the 7th level, Bee's honeypot at a brothel, where she attempts to explain to Danny why he shouldn't trust Leo, but is killed before she can elaborate. And she was quite different in the beta, but that's an entry for a little later. Dr. Laura White. Another important member of the Project and co-worker of Danny at some point, she is a little more empathetic and disapproves of the most egregious actions of the Project and tries to help Danny at his time in Dixmoor. And later she reveals to Danny what Leo has done, including the murder of his wife. TVMK. This is a TV channel and station featured in the levels Broadcast Interrupted and Altered State, and the name is quite ominous, with the MK being a reference to MK Ultra, a real-life government research project by the CIA into mind control, very similar to what's going on in the plot of Manhunt 2. Also makes sense because the channel is controlled by the Project and is used for coded messages throughout its programs. Also, there is a camera that can be found on set with the footage showing Leo killing staff of the studio with a katana, even though he claims they were killed by the Hunters. The Watchdogs. This group of hunters are featured in many of Manhunt 2's levels, and are, like most of the other factions, hired by the Project to hunt down Danny and Leo. They are also seen wearing suits and some sort of face disguise. Project Militia. The Project Militia is a group of hunters consisting of mercenaries hired by the Project to capture Danny, and is made up of former death row inmates who were on paper executed, just like Cash from the first game. And they appear prominently in the Leo flashback missions, and interestingly, their beta designs more so resemble the Cerberus from Manhunt 1 than the private military look from the final release. James Earl Cash. The protagonist of Manhunt 1, and a lot more mysterious than the main characters of the second game due to his backstory not really being well known, as well as for the fact that he's a mostly silent protagonist. He does have some dialogue, but not a lot, which was a common thing especially for Rockstar back then. Anyway, what we know is that James Earl Cash was an inmate at Darkwoods Penitentiary in Carcer City and was on death row for unknown offenses, although likely violent crimes, considering he was going to be executed before Starkweather intervened. Besides that, we know he is incredibly skilled, brutal, and calm and collected, even in the face of overwhelming odds, and the little emotion we see from him is when his family members are captured and threatened by Starkweather, and when he finally gets his revenge on the director at the end of the game. And after this, he seemingly goes on the run before establishing a construction company by the time Manhunt 2 takes place. Daniel Lamb. Daniel Lamb is the main protagonist alongside Leo Casper in Manhunt 2, who before the events of the game decided to offer himself to the Pickman Project in order to secure his family's financial future. Eventually though, Danny and Leo start to kill people, including his old partner Michael, his wife, and even other members of the project, resulting in Danny being taken to Dixmoor Asylum before he escapes and tries to learn about his past, as he now has no memories of being a scientist or of having this experiment done to him. He even believes that Leo Casper is a real person helping him in his journey. Of course, he eventually finds out the truth and eventually confronts the project scientists, and then Leo in a final battle over control of his mind, which in his canon ending, he wins. Also, Danny's personality is notably different from Leo, as at least at first he doesn't really enjoy killing to the extent of Leo, who encourages more violent and gruesome killings, while Daniel actually throws up after murdering his first victim in level 1. Leo Casper. Okay, Leo really made Manhunt 2 for me. It might sound a little crazy considering this man is one of the most evil and sadistic characters Rockstar has ever made, but he is just so entertaining and interesting. He's not the kind of psycho that Trevor is. He's heartless and violent, but he's also very excitable and motivating, which is strange, right? But he's a psycho through and through, and they really just tripled down on it. And most of why he's so much fun is because of his voice actor, Holter Graham, who absolutely killed it. Like, I admitted it was encouraging a little when Starkweather praises Cash along his journey, but Leo absolutely just blows it out of the water with this hype man dialogue. It's just hilarious. This guy's like a motivational speaker for serial killers.
You shouldn't be scared of the project. They should be scared of you. Nobody can f with you. You're unstoppable. It's your friendly neighborhood death dealer. Yeah! Who's next? Come on, bring it! Bring it! Oh, hey! Don't get full of yourself, Danny. I want more. More! You've become a bigger killer than I ever could. I'm f***ing proud of you, brother. No one can stop us. We're mother***ing invincible!
But real talk, who really is Leo? Well, in the game, he's not really an actual person, but a part of Danny's consciousness, an identity implanted in Daniel's mind as part of the Pikmin experiment. He is a dangerous assassin used by the project and the government in various missions before he eventually helps Danny escape and tries to take over his mind. He also kills Daniel's wife and many others to try and erase Daniel's past, but most of all, what he really wants is to destroy the project. And he does this by manipulating Danny along the way, but also encouraging him and reveling in the violence committed against the project. So not only does he want to be free from Danny's mind, but he also wants revenge against the people who created him, and made him into the psycho killer that he really is. So all in all, this is one of my favorite Rockstar characters. I just love how unapologetically evil he is, essentially no redeeming qualities at all. Dude is just a bad guy, and really sometimes there's nothing like just a completely evil villain. Level 4, the depths of the iceberg. Connections between gangs. So it's hard to find any concrete examples of connections between any of the gangs in the first game compared to the second one, but there are some similarities. Like, the Bloodhounds from Manhunt 2 are kind of similar to the War Dogs and Skins from Manhunt 1, and the Project Militia is kind of similar to the Cerberus, though more so in the beta. The White Rabbit in TVMK. So here's actually a direct reference to the first game, and there's another one after this as well, but in the TVMK studio on the level Broadcast Interrupted, there is a White Rabbit corpse which can be found, which could suggest some connection between Valiant Video Enterprises and the project, or at least TVMK. Considering the first game's snuff films are taped over a kids show, possibly done by this studio, but there isn't much other evidence of that being the case. However, this next entry does directly call back to Manhunt 1. The Bloodhounds mention the events of the first game. So yeah, a member of the Bloodhounds gang, also in Broadcast Interrupted, sometimes will say, "You heard about the manhunt back in Carcer?" Which is a cool nod because there aren't many connections at all between the two games. Daniel Lamb Session. Some really cool pieces of content for this game that a lot of people might not have heard are the therapy sessions with Dr. White and both Leo and Daniel, which give a lot of insight into the story of the project, as well as into their characters and psyche. In the interview, he is still mostly cognizant of who he is and what they're doing in regards to the project, as he is given the drug Cortexa, which, again, a later entry, and still retains his knowledge as a doctor, being able to clearly describe his condition and amnesia. And in this moment is one of the only times we get to see the real Danny, not one just being controlled or influenced by Leo. And the voice acting here is really great, I gotta say.
I'm sorry. I just want to see my family again. Please.
I'm afraid there are some memories the drug cannot bring back.
What do you mean? What am I forgetting? Please, I want to know. Tell me. Please. Lindsay, I beg you. Lord, no. Oh, No, I'm so sick of forgetting.
We will help you, Daniel. I will help you, no matter what.
Help me with what? Where am I?
You're in a safe place, Daniel. A place where we can help you.
Thank you. Who are you? My name is Dr. White.
Leo Casper's session. Leo's session is honestly just as illuminating as Daniel's, as we get to not only see that he was responsible for killing Dr. Deborah as well as many other members of the project, but also terrorists and, quote, evil men as she describes, before he was implanted into Danny's mind back when he was a real person and a government assassin.
You see, good and evil are for those wage slaves out there that you control, but no one controls me.
So the killing of the Project Science...
Leo even describes how he wishes he could be a normal person, but due to the mind control and implanted memories, all he can think about is killing and how to survive. He even describes all the unique and brutal ways he could kill Dr. White, and even when asked about his past, he can't remember it, or at least chooses not to, making an undoubtedly evil maniac, but one that was created to be like this by the Project, which I think does add another layer to an already very interesting character. Dixmoor Studies. The Dixmoor Studies are simply the title given to the therapy sessions of Leo Casper and Daniel Lamb by the Project. But this next entry does give a little more context into the Pikmin Bridge and these experiments. Cortexa. So this is the drug that is used by Danny in the game, specifically in the level Ghost, to help him recover or stimulate memories that are buried due to the amnesia he underwent as part of the project. It's also used during the session with Dr. White and was likely invented by Daniel himself, as Leo describes it as something that Danny left for himself. Stanley Grex. This is one of the characters brought up in Leo Casper's session, and is the person assassinated by Danny on the orders of Leo during the mission Assassination. The man they killed was named Stanley Grex, and was a rich businessman who was providing funding for the project after it was cancelled by the government, and it's likely Leo chose him as a target in order to strike at them directly. The events of Blackwell Island. Blackwell Island is the location of the level Best Friends, in which Danny had kidnapped the former project scientist and friend Michael Grant to get him to remove the Pikmin Bridge. However, Michael escapes and the project assassins come to kill both Michael and Danny, which makes it so Leo has to come in and clean house, so to speak, so that they can both escape. Deleted content from Manhunt 2. Deleted weapons. Okay, so some of you might know, but I did an entire video on the cut content of the Manhunt games, including all of the cut and deleted weapons. But I will list a lot of the interesting ones here again, but if you want a more in-depth analysis on the cut content of the game, make sure to check out that video after this one, but here goes. There was a newspaper weapon, blowtorch, camera, Molotov, grenade, silent sniper, acid bottle, metal hook, matchbook, and the most infamous one, how do I not get demonetized here? A adult toy, which even had full executions which were found in the PC version. Deleted executions. Again, same scenario here. Already covered these, but I'll hit you with some of the best ones in my opinion. Pretty much all of which were environmental executions, because only a few of the cut weapons even have animations. And yes, some versions do have different animations based on the censorship of which version you're playing, as the plier execution, for example, is much more tame on the PS2 than it is compared to the uncut PC version. And I'm sure you can just imagine what the gruesome executions are for that. Anyway, back on track here, there was a vending machine execution which was shockingly kind of violent, and a dumpster one, as well as a harvester, guillotine, and quite a few more. But again, check out the other video after this one for more context on those. Statue of Decay. Simply put, this is an unused model from the game for the Bloodhound Gang of the Statue of Liberty, which was found in the files for the level Broadcast Interrupted. And I know Manhunt is kind of already like the OG Purge, but this literally looks like something you'd find in one of those movies. Dreamer. This is once again another unused model. Curiously enough though, it seems to be a beta model of Leo wearing a sleep mask and pajamas for some reason. Level 5, the bottom of the iceberg. Starkweather's snuff films. There are quite a few snuff films produced by Starkweather and Mr. Nasty by the time Cash is starring in Manhunt, and most of these star characters you'll recognize from the game. There's White Rabbits Down the Hole and Here Bunny Bunny Bunny, featuring the white rabbit that tries to kill Cash. Then there's Pigsy's Greatest Hits, and well, that should be pretty self-explanatory. Then there's Let's Play Ramirez Says, starring, you guessed it, Ramirez, and even one for the Tramp titled The Tramp Who Knew Too Much. The Pikmin Project Experiments. Project Pravitas. Here are those other project experiments that I was talking about earlier. They're described in secret documents from the project found on the official Manhunt 2 website. And in this one in particular, Project Pravitas, it concerns a clinical trial regarding a subject with antisocial personality disorder who is treated by a very strange procedure where their left kidney, appendix, and a portion of their small intestine are removed. Project Milton 4. Like the last one, which I forgot to mention, the text is kind of obscured and hard to read, but essentially experimental subjects were being used to test an anesthetic injection, which was done using extensive burns to test how well it helped them tolerate or feel the pain. Quite the ethical experiment, I must say. Field tests. There are also a few field tests featured in these documents as well, those being Field Test Cavis, which was about, well, let me just read you the headline for this one. Quote, further exploration into control conditioning therapy. Previous attempts to eliminate subjects' personalities and memory have been successful, but instilling loyalty to the project and developing effective trigger commands have had limited success. So clearly this is in relation to what happened to Danny and the Pikmin Bridge. And then there's Field Test Eminus, which is a completely different thing. It's actually some sort of testing for a bullet intended on causing as much physical trauma as possible, as it would also trigger a small explosion upon impact. Which means this is likely what Danny and Leo used in their assassination, which explains why it made such a gory scene, but basically any headshot with any gun in the game does that, so who really knows? The Pikmin Bridge. I've talked about it a whole lot already on this iceberg, but the main premise behind the Pikmin Bridge experiment was to create an implant used in a subject that could allow two personalities to exist simultaneously in one individual, that could be pulled out on demand with the use of a key phrase, which is exactly what they did with Danny, as they implanted the Leo persona into him and could call him out at any time with the phrase, and have him do their dirty work as a relentless, cruel assassin. Although the bridge malfunctioned and allowed Danny and Leo to interact with each other, causing the events of the game to unfold. Manhunt was taped over a kids show. This is a little known but eerie fact, which is shown after finishing the first game when a short video plays of a robot chef speaking backwards, which insinuates that the game you just played, which was a snuff film created by Mr. Nasty and Starkweather, that was taped over a kids show of all things, and it's quite shocking when you see it for the first time. I mean, it just comes out of nowhere. What is he actually saying? Well, apparently it is actually the cheat code for God mode backwards, so what he's saying is actually just invincible. But there is more to that we'll get into a little bit later. The journalist's name is Rob. One of the other most important characters in Manhunt 1 that I've yet to really delve into is the journalist, who helps Cash and ends up exposing the snuff film ring and exposing Starkweather, and even the corrupt police department by the end of the game. Why do people think her name is Rob then? Well, it's not. It's probably something like Robin or something similar, but in the opening cutscene of the mission Border Patrol, it references her character as Rob in the subtitles before it cuts away, and never actually reveals her full name. Mr. Nasty could be the perv's leader. This is quite the theory, considering Mr. Nasty is only really featured in the first game, and barely at all. I mean, he's not actually in the actual game itself, but he also has a completely different goal to the gangs of the second game. I mean, he doesn't work with the project like the pervs do, at least I don't think so. So I don't really see how Mr. Nasty could be working with them, or even be their leader, really. The journalist was hunted down by Mr. Nasty and was locked away in Dixmoor Asylum. Wow, yeah, some of these theories are getting a little wild, but there could be a little more truth to this one than you might be thinking. Well, I don't know if Mr. Nasty is directly responsible, but it does seem like the journalist does get sent to a psychiatric institution and breaks down mentally due to all the violence she encountered and witnessed, believing everyone to be in or a part of some kind of conspiracy. Now, is she at Dixmoor Asylum specifically? Well, no, or at least very unlikely, given it's for project experiments and only dangerous criminals known for doing heinous acts, which she of course has no part in as far as we know, and we only see male patients there in the game as well, although at one point female inmates were planned, but again it's its own entry, so how do we know she got locked up? Well, an audio clip found on the Manhunt website shows that she was indeed taken in and is interviewed by a doctor regarding her mental trauma. So maybe this theory isn't so wild after all, and maybe Mr. Nasty did play a role in diminishing her character and getting her locked away, in order to absolve himself and those responsible in the snuff film ring. It's definitely a possibility.
I'm here because it's a lie. The police, the state, the mayor, all of that crap. It's a lie, and you know it, and you still do this. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Why not?
Let me see. Oh yeah, because you're using it to keep me in here? Because we've been over it 1,000 times? Because you know what I think about it? I can't go back to work. I don't sleep anymore. I'm locked up in a madhouse. My career is screwed. I will have...
Manhunt 2 was recorded by security cameras. So we already talked about at length how Manhunt is a snuff film being recorded by Lionel Starkweather, which is shown most prominently by the camera effects over the executions, showing what the actual film probably looks like. Well, the theory goes that all of Manhunt 2 was also recorded, which is how we are watching it now, or rather playing it. Although I don't really see how this could be possible, as Manhunt 2 isn't even about snuff films, it's about the project. And not only that, but a lot of the stuff that happens, including the final mission, all takes place in Danny's head and not in reality. Not to mention there's flashbacks and all this other stuff that would disprove this theory. But I'm sure the segments in which Danny was running around town just killing people like in the asylum and on the streets and whatnot, that could have all been recorded, but it's not really an important enough facet of the story in my opinion, at least in comparison to the first game, which really doubled or even tripled down on that gritty VHS-like aesthetic. The real story of Manhunt 2. So I'm not sure what this is exactly referring to, possibly some hidden meaning in the story about the government or MK Ultra or some kind of underlying conspiracy, or if this is suggesting that Manhunt 2 had a very different story at one point in development, which it absolutely did. Most of the story though stays intact in terms of characters and set pieces, hunters and such, but story beats were very different from what little we know of early builds, such as Leo and Danny possibly being two different people to start, which is a pretty big change considering it causes the main conflict of the game. And there were also quite a few cut levels and changed levels, making them almost unrecognizable from what they would become. But those have their own entries, so I think I'll just leave it at that. But there was an even earlier version of the story that we barely know anything about. But it's pretty wild, so I'm gonna save it for later because there are a few entries related to it. Dixmoor Internal Memo. So I really have no clue how people manage to receive these, but I would love to have one of these. It's really cool stuff. Basically back, I'm assuming when the game was released back in 2007, Rockstar sent out these Dixmoor Hospital internal memos, as well as some other goodies like these bracelets, and the letters give a brief synopsis of the game and thank fans of the series for their support. Also, shout out to Yoshimi, he did a great video looking into all the obscure merchandise of the Manhunt games. It's not on the iceberg, but there is some really cool and obscure stuff, like a Manhunt Polaroid camera and a Pigsy figure that I definitely wish I could get my hands on. Oh, and real official Rockstar weapons. Pretty crazy stuff. Hidden camera in Lamb's residence. I guess this could lean into the theory that most of Manhunt 2 was recorded, but I think this just supports the fact that the project was always watching and keeping an eye on Danny for pretty obvious reasons. Leo Casper is real. We already looked into Leo's character a bit, but it's pretty clear by the time you get to the final mission, well, even before that, but it's obvious that Leo is in Danny's mind. He's not actually a real person, but a split personality. But he was indeed a real person before this. I mean, they didn't just invent Leo, he really was a top-notch government assassin, and they used that as the basis to create the personality they put in Danny's head. Because who's more useful to you than a killer that will do anything for you? Problem is, they didn't know Leo doesn't just follow orders. And they also didn't count on Danny and Leo meeting each other. Level 6, The Abyss. The Vienna Cut. So I just want to say before we get into the other entries, the creator of the Iceberg, Richtofen5200, is a much more invested Manhunt fan than I already thought, because he actually made a unique version of Manhunt 2 called the Vienna Cut, which uses a lot of beta and cut content and even changes around missions reflecting the version originally being developed by Rockstar Vienna. And he's still working on it, I believe, and uploads videos of it on his channel if you want to check it out, but right now we're going to jump into a lot of that lost and deleted content. Deleted scenes A13, A19, A20. So in the older versions, specifically the pre-beta, there were some levels that went unused in the actual game, and we know a little bit about a couple of them. But many of them are actually mysterious, with only a number representing where they took place in the game's timeline, those being a missing level 13, 19, and 20, as there were originally planned to be 20 levels, just like in the first game, instead of only the 16 if you include both endings. But that's not all, because the mission order of this version is also drastically different, and there were even 5 bonus levels planned. And even more additional endings that never made it in, which included a different Leo and Dr. White ending. History Museum. This is one of those cut levels that we at least have a little info on, with this being the planned 5th mission of the game, taking place in some kind of history museum, which we know a bit about thanks to files naming the level, as well as it having audio for some environmental executions, including an Iron Maiden, as well as an Aztec altar and a mace. Sorority House. This is the other known planned level, this one being the 8th level at some point, and we know a bit more about this one as there is some audio as well as environmental executions assigned to it, including a window execution. But as for the story, well, at this point it seems like Danny had to either save or kill a female student at this sorority house, which may have been an early version of Judy Sender, although it kind of remains unclear. Either way, it really hurts to see so many levels cut from this game. Beta Domestic Disturbance. Domestic Disturbance is the 14th level of Manhunt 2, where you play as Leo in a flashback to when Daniel's wife was murdered. However, in the beta, this level was very different. In the original version, it was meant to be the 3rd level rather than one of the last, and you would actually play as Danny and are tasked by Leo with hunting down 3 project scientists, with there actually being an audio recording of Leo describing this.
3 project scientists live in this neighborhood, Danny. They may look like boring suburban, but by day they torture people like you and me. We gotta find and kill them all. Negotiations are over. They've already sent out the Legion to patrol the streets. Mistakes made by the project. They're completely psychotic. Look for the red mailboxes. That's where they live.
The female inmates of Dixmoor Hospital. Yeah, remember when I said technically it was possible that the journalist could be here? Well, at one point in development, it was planned for there to be female inmates at the hospital as well, because there are a few pretty disturbing audio lines that can be found of a female inmate.
Save me! I'm the nice one! Pleased to meet me. I'm killing my twin. Where's the handsome one? He's dirty. Let's make a 4-way. She's the dirty one! Pick me! The bridge has disappeared. Me, Jane, and me, Jane. Where's my pickmen? One side to another, not a rope bridge. Pick me! Pick a man! Pick a man! Over the bridge and far away. No more needles. She's sleeping. She's me. I killed her.
Yeah, clearly another victim of the Pikmin project. Legion's bigger role. The Legion is a group of hunters featured only in the first level, as well as release therapy as hallucinations in Leo's ending. But like this entry suggests, they were to play a bigger role, being featured in more levels, notably the level Domestic Disturbance, which we talked about, where the project scientists living there would have Legion patrolling the streets and hunting Danny. And they also looked very different, having nooses tied around their necks, as well as more rope wrapped around their limbs, and a cross that was attached to their backs. Beta Militia. I mentioned this a few times, but yeah, the beta version of the Project Militia, who were originally called Hades, are very different from what we got in the final game, being more reminiscent of Cerberus and even of the Combine from Half-Life, wearing strange masks and futuristic military gear. Gimp Judy Sender. Alluded to this a while ago when we talked about the character of Judy Sender, and yes, despite being a project scientist, she was at one point in development meant to wear this gimp outfit, which is kind of strange, but the brothel featured in Bee's Honeypot does take customers and bring them to the project for human experimentation, and maybe in early versions she just worked for the brothel or possibly ran it, but wasn't a project scientist, although it's pretty unclear at this point. Cheat codes. Both Manhunt and Manhunt 2 feature quite a few cheat codes like many other Rockstar titles, especially from the PS2 era. Also, for both games, most codes differ between platforms and versions, and to even unlock some of the codes, you have to beat the game on the hardest difficulty as well. But some of the standout ones from the first game are Invincible, which we talked about earlier, that gives you God mode. Then there's the one that gives you infinite stamina, Super Punch, which kills enemies in one hit, a couple of skin swaps for cash, including Pigsy and the Monkey, and Silence, which makes enemies not hear anything. In Manhunt 2, they're a bit more basic for the most part, with infinite ammo and the level select, but on PC they have a really interesting one, something called Fun Mode, which makes blood turn into flowers and rainbows, and replaces weapons with candy canes and flowers and rubber ducks and stuff, complete with some cartoon sound effects. So I guess you can make Manhunt 2 kid-friendly after all. Never thought I'd say it. Although I'm not sure if it really changes any of the gore effects at all.
Put some muscle into it. He's down, now finish him.
Hidden audio. Well, if we're talking about actual hidden audio, then Manhunt 1's main menu is where it's at, but that's the next entry, so maybe this is also referring to other cases I'm unaware of, but it could just be talking about unused and cut audio as well, which both games have, but it's definitely more prominent in the second one due to the many changes in the game's story and level design. So I'll just play a few cut Leo lines here.
I told you, Danny, they wanted to make us slaves. We're not gonna be controlled by anyone, right? Brothers in war. With this gasoline, we can turn these guys into human tiki torches. There must be a tranquilizer gun around here, something to keep the lab rats in line. Let's find it. We had one chance and you blew it. Kill him now! Shit, he escaped.
Manhunt menu subliminal messages. Okay, so this is the main hidden audio fans may know of, that being a secret message on the main menu of Manhunt, which is accessible after beating the game. And a man spells backwards invincible, which is where the cheat code comes from, and probably why some people think the robot also says it. Also though, there are some other creepy lines that can be heard. Take a listen. The Forgotten Cut. Scrapped plot and ideas. Well, we kinda already went over a lot of the cut content, including the levels, weapons, and whatnot, and again, I did a whole video on this, but the scrapped story I haven't got into as much. I did say the story was likely very different, as a lot of the levels were rearranged and changed heavily, like Domestic Disturbance in the pre-beta version, and there were even many completely scrapped levels like the sorority house and museum. So what part do they play in the original story? I'm not too sure, but I think it's safe to say that in one version of the story, Danny and Leo were meant to be separate people in the very early versions. And apparently there was also a very strange cut character called Frisbee, who was some sort of puppet that might have influenced Danny to kill instead of Leo, making Danny actually insane and not just under the influence of the Pikmin Bridge. And that all ties into one of the creepiest and most intriguing pieces of lost content from Manhunt 2. That being the lost menu. So, the lost menu. An early version of the menu was found from footage taken from graphic designer Steve Walsh, who worked on many of Rockstar's games, although he wasn't officially credited in Manhunt 2. Although I think it's safe to say that this was at least a real concept, and definitely supports the ventriloquist doll story. And like I said, this menu is even creepier than the one we got. Take a look. Manhunt 2 original logo. In the infamous and earliest known uncensored build of the game, the title screen and many things are different, but the logo remains pretty much the same, so this could be referring to an even earlier look and design that we didn't get to see much of. But that very early menu design did feature a different logo, so that could be what this is. The ventriloquist religious extremists. We're getting real deep here. So again, this relates to the ventriloquist doll Frisbee, I believe, from the very early drafts of the story, which possibly had a group of religious extremists and were maybe even a very early version of the project, although with this I'm not sure, there's very little information on this. Although I have come across posts and such by people claiming the story revolved around a character, possibly Danny, who was told by the puppet to kill people, which he thought was the voice of God, so this could possibly tie back to that. Also, apparently Cash was going to be a part of this story, and maybe even this doll was based on the chef seen at the end of Manhunt, and Danny actually watched the tape of Cash, which made him want to kill. But that's a little tinfoil hat of me to say, I guess, I don't know. But this early version of the story, despite being radically different, is still very fascinating to me for sure. Snuffed Warren LeBlanc. So Warren LeBlanc is actually the kid who was responsible for the Manhunt-inspired murder that we discussed briefly, which took place on February 27, 2004, and was attributed to his addiction to the game, as he was said to have committed the crime in a similar way to the game, which is truly haunting. However, police found no connection between the game and the crime, and rather stated that the murder was drug-related robbery. Mr. Nasty is Donald Love. Now, here's an interesting theory, especially for you GTA fans out there, which I'm sure is most of you if you made it this far into a Manhunt video, but yeah. The character of Donald Love, featured in GTA 3, Vice City, and Liberty City Stories, is an extremely rich businessman and owner of the Love Media Group. However, he is also a criminal and gives quite a few missions to the player in these games. Why would he be Mr. Nasty? Well, at the very least, we do know that Donald Love is actually a cannibal. Yeah, that's right. Because in the mission campaign in Liberty City Stories, he eats human flesh and says it even tastes like chicken, and even throws, quote, morgue parties. So knowing all this, it's possible that Donald Love is involved in the Mr. Nasty film ring, but is he actually him? Well, it could be possible, seeing how he is seemingly the only one not caught at the end of Manhunt, and seeing how rich and powerful he is, well, maybe that's why. Take-Two restores IP in 2020. Take-Two is the parent company of Rockstar Games, and simply put, in 2020, they renewed their ownership of the Manhunt IP, possibly meaning we'll get new content in the future, but to be honest, with all the controversy surrounding it, it is very unlikely, and they probably just want to make sure they secure all their intellectual properties for the foreseeable future in case they do end up changing their minds. Hunter Sign-Up. This refers to a part of the Manhunt instructional manual, which is made like a catalog for Valiant Video Enterprises. So in case you want to sign up to be a hunter, you can just leave your name, email, city, and state. And you can even sign up your friends to get killed apparently. That's like a free hitman service. What a bargain. Manhunt 3 on G2A. I guess on a couple of these fishy key websites that sell Steam and other PC keys to unlock games, there were listings for Manhunt 3, which obviously doesn't exist, although momentarily maybe this got some people's hopes up. Either way though, I'm still patiently awaiting this game to get announced, even though it's probably never gonna happen. And that's the end for this iceberg. Thank you all so much for watching and sticking it through to the end of the video. I always appreciate it, and it helps grow the channel and get the video out to more eyes. And also, since you're here, if you haven't seen my video on the cut content of Manhunt, we have that as well, and even a 2-hour-long excursion into the myths and urban legends of the GTA games. Also, we did Red Dead as well, if that's more your cup of tea. But anyway, let me know any other interesting Manhunt facts that you know. Maybe what you think of the games. Also, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. We're closing in on 100K. It would really mean a lot. And yeah, that's basically been it. I'm sourcebrew, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, and peace out.